Jews was near, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and the money changers seated at the tables. Making a whip of cords, he drove them out of the temple, both the sheep and the cattle. He also poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. He told those who were selling the doves, "Take these things out of here. Stop making my Father's house a marketplace." His disciples remembered this, that it is written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." The Jews then said to him, "What sign can you show for doing this?" And Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will rise it up." Then Jesus said, the Jews then said, "This temple has been under construction for 46 years, and will you raise it up in 3 days?" But he was speaking of the temple of his body. And after he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this, and they believed the scripture, the word that Jesus had spoken. The gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Please be seated. Today we continue our journey through Lent as we each week examine a lifestyle choice or something about our lives that we can contemplate and think about that help prepare us for Easter. This week there are 3 stories or illustrations that I wanted to share with you that might help us in our journey during Lent. The first one comes from the Old Testament reading. Now the Old Testament reading is when the people of Israel received the commandments or the law from God. Now, there are several misunderstandings, very common misunderstandings about the law and about these commandments and why they were given and what is the responsibility of the people and of us today towards these commandments. And the first one is this. People tend to think that these commandments are all, they're just moral ways of living. They're just some high standards that we should just kind of, if we could, strive towards meeting. And that's not true. The law or the commandments were given to the people of Israel because they had just been chosen to be God's special people. And as being part of God's people, they were given a mission. And these commandments, they're instructions about how they were going to fulfill that mission. Back then, this is 1,800 years before Jesus, so this is what, 3,800, almost 4,000 years ago when these commands were given. And I'm sure you can understand, back then there was no social media. There was no big movie screens. There was no worship screens. There was no phones that we could tap in and see these incredible images communicated to us. There was no multimedia per se. And so what God had decided was that the very lives of his people would be a kind of multimedia presentation. Their lifestyle and how they lived in community with one another, that very lifestyle was going to communicate to people and fulfill this mission. Their lives were the platform that God would preach through. And so he gives them all of these instructions that's going to help them fulfill their mission, which was basically to prepare the world, to convince the world that they needed a Savior. Now, the second big misunderstanding about the commandments is that we think there are only 10 of them. And that's not true. There are actually 613 commandments. And if we had read a few more verses in our Old Testament reading, what we would have discovered is this, that the people had gathered in front of, at the base of Mount Sinai. Moses was there. God was establishing his covenant with them. God was speaking to them. And he started giving them these instructions. And after the 10th one, the people said, "No, that's enough." That's in the very next verses when they say this, right? They actually interrupt God. And they say, "We can't handle it anymore. This is too much for us. How about this? Moses, you go off with God in private, and God speaks to you, just to you, and you can relate to us, because it's just too much for us to bear and handle actually listening to God." Imagine that. And so what happens? Moses goes up Mount Sinai, and he's going to receive the rest of the commandments directly from God, the next 603 of them. He's going to write them down, and it's going to take him a while. You can imagine. He's going to learn 613 commandments. And it's while he's up in the mountain that the people then get afraid a second time. They think that God has abandoned them because Moses is taking his time up there, and they think Moses did something wrong and God killed him. And so they decide to abandon God and build the whole golden calf. And you all know how bad that turned out, right? But it all begins with God wanting to have a personal relationship with them, to tell them directly all of their instructions. And the people say, "No, we can't handle hearing from God." they never really understood the purpose of these commandments. And they wander far away. And their lives don't reflect the mission. Their lives don't become the platform for them fulfilling God's mission. Instead, it becomes something altogether different. Now we can flash forward 2,000 years to Jesus in the temple, and here we have this scene that we read every year. It's about Jesus getting angry. And a couple side notes, and if you've heard me talk about this before, this will be familiar to you. They're actually not in the temple proper. There's the temple, and then there's a courtyard, or a temple mount, a plaza that surrounds the temple. And then that has walls around it. So they're in that plaza that surrounds the temple, and it's kind of basically a marketplace. And what's going on is that people are coming to worship at the temple, and they're traveling from far distances, and when they get there, they brought their animals to sacrifice, and they're not able to do so because, well, they're told that their animals aren't good enough, and then they have to buy these pre-brewed doves that are being sold over here for a very high price. And of course, the priests are in and on it. It's a big racket. But the bottom line is this. People who want to come and worship God are being taken advantage of. And the very lifestyle of these people, these money changers, these people that are working in the temple, that are supposed to help people to worship God, instead, their very way of making money and living is putting an obstacle between people and God. Especially those people who are poor and vulnerable, who have traveled a long way. And so Jesus is angry at this whole system. He's angry because people should know better, because they should have been listening to the commands of God, which would have established relationships and a lifestyle that would have enabled people to come and worship God instead of putting obstacles between them and God. And so Jesus is angry. He drives all of these animals and all of these people out of the temple area so that people can, for a short moment, can have access to God. Now, how long do you think it took before all those people returned and set their tables up again? Probably about 30 minutes after Jesus left. They were all back at it, right? Because this was the way that they lived. This is the way they'd been accustomed to living. This is how they made their living. This is how they treated people. As I was reading both of these stories, I was thinking, okay, so how can we translate it into our time today? What do we do? What is our lifestyle? How do we set up the ways that we live that prevent people from encountering God? Because that's what Jesus gave us a whole new set of commands, a whole new set of instructions, so that we as God's people could fulfill the mission that Jesus had left to us, which was to let people know about the good news. But too often we are structuring our lives, we are living our lives in such a way that we're, instead of helping people come to know God, our very lives are placing obstacles in front of people. And let me give you two examples of how this happens. The first one is this, and this is more kind of a little, something that's just been on my heart for a while now. In our culture today, we allow false truths and propaganda to shape our opinions of other people. Across the board. It doesn't matter if you're liberal or conservative, if you're Christian or not Christian. It's just part of our culture. It's ingrained in us now. We allow propaganda and false stories and false truths and all sorts of images that we have of people. We allow them to shape our opinions of other people. Without even getting to know people, we draw opinions and conclusions about their moral value, about who they are and what they're worth, all based on these stories that we hear through the news stations, through movies, through our friends. And we allow these false truths, these false ideas to shape our opinions of other people. And because we do that, we develop attitudes and lifestyles that turn people away from God. And that is tragic. Just recently, you all know I got to go to India, and each week I want to share as long as I can. I want to share a story with you about my trip to India and how it relates to our gospel message. So bring up the first picture. I got to visit our Canadian school in Kathmandu, and these are some of the students from the school. And when you look at them, what do you see? You see incredibly bright faces. They're laughing, they're smiling, they're having a great time. Why? Because they're going to school. And every time I got to see them, there's such joy inside their hearts. They just wanted to talk and babble and share their stories and tell how glad they were at because they got to go to school. There are over 106 schools at the Arcot Lutheran Church. Our synod has a companion relationship with the Arcot Lutheran Church in the very southeastern portion of India. It's a very small territory, actually. And we have a companion relationship with the Lutheran Church in Saran, India. And we have a companion relationship, our school, with the school in Kadamai Lord. So this is taken from the school in Kadamai Lord. So go to the next picture. This is a great picture. When I went there, I got to give a presentation and give some gifts to the school, and they had made all sorts of gifts for me. So all of the youngest kids got to come and to give me gifts. And so this is me receiving one of my gifts from one of the kids. So I had a great time being able to visit this school. Go to the next slide. Most all of these schools are boarding schools. And this is where the kids live. You'll see that there are little cubby holes, and that's all of the worldly possessions in those cubby holes. They get to sleep on the floor there. There's little mats, very, very thin mats that are rolled up. You can see in amongst their possessions. They roll that up, and that's where they live all throughout the year. They get to see their parents for one short month during the summer, and if their parents make it to the school to visit them during the Christmas and Easter holidays, then they'll get to visit their parents. The situation is this: the kids love and their parents are grateful for the opportunity for their kids to go to school. Why? Because it changes everything for them. Of these 10,000 students, all of them come from the Dalit caste, which is the untouchable. It's the lowest caste within India. It's the caste that does not get opportunities to advance in life and to live life. The entire society is structured so that they are oppressed and kept in a very poverty-stricken area or lifestyle. And so school represents hope, a chance for them to be able to go and to escape what they have been condemned to by an unjust social system. And so it's the juxtaposition, it's the difference between this joy that I saw in these kids' hearts from being able to go to school and then understanding what does it really mean that they're going to school. They're living like this and they're away from their family. The entirety of the school, all these 10,000 students, these 100 schools, they're supported by people who give monthly gifts. They sponsor children. You know these kinds of programs, right? Lutheran Partners in Global Ministries is the chief organization that helps to connect Americans with children, and then for $25 a month you get to sponsor a child, and then that child gets to go to school. So I did the math. The LBGM has 1,400 people that they sponsor, Americans that they've connected with students from the Arcot Lutheran Church school system. So at $25 a month, it's about $42,000 that's given in order for these kids to go to school. That's how these 106 schools exist. There's no other source of income for them except for people who are willing to sponsor kids going to school. And once again, as I saw how this system works, I was taken aback to the amount of change and the difference sponsoring children makes in their lives. And I was remembering a quote from the president of Compassion International when he was asked, why is this such a big deal to sponsor children? He goes, more than the opportunity to actually study in a school, what it does is it gives them hope. Because it says to them, in a world that has forgotten them, that has left them stranded, often alone, impoverished, someone cares. And the fact that someone cares enough to do this gives them the hope that helps them to escape the chains of poverty. And by doing that, they're able to encounter the God who loves them. It's an incredibly simple way where we can structure our lives, because it's not easy to come up with $25 a month, is it? And we can structure our lives so that people can find hope. And hope makes all the difference in the world. But the thing is this. Too often, we allow false truths, false ideas, to shape our opinions of what sponsoring kids are like, or what India is like, and what these countries should be providing for themselves and teaching their own kids. We allow our own false ideas to shape our opinions of others, and we structure our lives, which are quite wealthy, quite exuberant. They're quite filled with many blessings. And instead of using our lives as a multimedia platform to provide hope to other people, we're just too wrapped up in ourselves. And I thought this is a great example of why Jesus got so angry at the time. Because people were structuring their lives, and by doing so, living a lifestyle that prevented people from encountering God. We as a church have to listen to that. And we have to go and we have to take our lives and say, hey, whatever I can do in my life, this is just one small example. You can do it in many multitudes of ways. Use your life to help people encounter the good news. Amen?
Amen.
Let's stand for our song of the day.